I'm here today joined by three plaintiffs in the Gilby Whitford case. We have Bill Whitford, who's also our cracking and packing explainer extraordinaire. We're also joined by Deborah Patel, plaintiff and former executive director of Milwaukee Children's Choir and active in the Women's Club of Wisconsin. And then we have a third plaintiff, Michael Switzenbaum, a third plaintiff in the case and a retired professor of environmental engineering at Marquette University. So thank you so much again for being here. I'd like to start with Bill to walk us through on some maps what exactly happened so that everyone who's watching, and myself included, can understand really what happened in Milwaukee with the gerrymandering process. So I'll turn it to Bill.
Milwaukee and statewide, I should say. Now, I've been benefited by some wonderful maps that Dan Folkman has produced. And I'd like to call the first map up on the screen at this point. Dan, can you do that? So this first map illustrates the redistricting scheme that existed in Wisconsin through the 2010 elections. It's the one on the left in March 2008, and compares it with the gerrymander that we now have. The districts that the Democrats won in 2008 and 2016 are indicated by the blue shading. And you can see that there was a great reduction. Both years, 2008 and, well, particularly 2018, where the map looks about the same as 2016, there was only one district that changed hands. The great reduction in Democratic strength between the two maps, and that's almost entirely due to the gerrymander. Both years, 2008 and 2018, were strong Democratic years. The statewide vote for Democrats was strong in both years, but the Democrats had many less seats in the assembly as a result of the gerrymander. In fact, in 2018, the Democrats got a majority of the statewide vote and only 36 out of 99 seats in the state assembly under the current gerrymander. Can we now turn to the second map, which focuses on Milwaukee County, and we can see in a little more detail how this was accomplished. This map also compares, this slide also compares the districts under the previous redistricting scheme and the ones under the current one for Milwaukee County. Milwaukee County is shaded has that light blue line that moves east and west and north and south. Now let's look first at the districts under the previous redistricting scheme called 2010 here. There are the ones the Democrats won in 2010 are shaded in blue. There were 15 in total. If you look at the right-hand map, which is the current map, showing the 2012 results under the new redistricting scheme, there were only 11 that the Democrats won. So that shows that reduction of 15 to 11, even though 2012 was a better Democratic year than 2010, shows that there was a shift to the Republicans of 4 seats entirely due to the gerrymandering. A couple of other points before we get even more detailed. If you look at the left-hand map, the old map, all those districts are all those blue districts are in Milwaukee County. You don't have districts that cross county lines, but you'll see many more districts that cross county lines in the right-hand map. And you'll see the districts in the left-hand map they're not squares, but they're much more square-like. They're what we call compact. In the right-hand district, you have, and we'll begin to focus on that, some very elongated districts, which are the cracked districts, and we'll talk about that. So I think it's now time to move to the next one. There. This is focusing on the north side of Milwaukee County. And I want to talk here about some of the techniques, particularly what are called packing and cracking, that are used to produce this kind of switch of Democratic districts to Republican districts. And this happens statewide, but we're just focusing on Milwaukee County here. I'd first call your attention to district number 10. District number 10, on the area next to the lake, includes the village of Shorewood. The village of Shorewood is a very heavily Democratic area in Milwaukee. It's not part of Milwaukee City, but it is part of Milwaukee County. It has historically been linked in an assembly district to the village immediately to the north of it, Whitefish Bay, and on up north of there into Milwaukee County. In this current redistricting, in what's called packing, is they took the village of Shorewood and they moved it to a district to the west, which is a heavily African-American neighborhood. The Republicans never run a candidate there. They combined a heavily Democratic area, Shorewood, with another heavily Democratic area to make a completely packed district. The net effect is to deprive the Democrats in Shorewood of a chance of possibly influencing the outcome in an assembly race, because whereas in the past they were linked to the north in a district that was somewhat competitive, now their votes are sort of wasted. And you can see the same thing to the community immediately to the north of Shorewood, Whitefish Bay. Whitefish Bay historically was Republican, is turning, is now Democratic. It wasn't a competitive district, but what this map did and what we call cracking was to take Whitefish Bay and the community immediately to North Fox Point and run the district in a very slender north-south district way up into the northern reaches of Ozaukee County and make it safely Republican in what we call a crack district. And the net effect is to take those Democratic votes in Whitefish Bay and basically waste them because they get overwhelmed by the Republican votes to the north part of Ozaukee County. You see a similar result in District 24, immediately to the west of the Lakeside District, where the district runs, as you can see, down south into Milwaukee County, picks up some Democratic areas in Milwaukee County, adjacent there to Assembly District 11, and then runs it to the northwest into very overwhelmingly Republican areas to create another cracked district. So this kind of cracking, where you come down and pick up some of the Democratic votes in Milwaukee County and then stretch it out in a very elongated, not compact district called cracking, is a fundamental technique of gerrymandering that was done all through Milwaukee County. We're just focusing on the north side now. And similar techniques of packing and cracking were replicated all across the state. And that's why we have what I would call a safe Republican gerrymander that leads to a division between the parties of the seats in the assembly that has almost no relationship to the votes the parties get around the state. I think that's enough talk about the maps. Should we move on, Claire?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for walking me through that. And Debbie, what was the reason that you joined on as a plaintiff of the case?
The first thing that happened is that I took a look at my map, and the new map didn't make a lot of sense. It goes over 4 counties, and if you look at District 23 and 24, they not only split up Milwaukee County, but they split up Ozaukee County. They split up Mequon. So part of Mequon, the city of Mequon, is in District 23, and part of the city of Mequon is in District 24. So even the people in Ozaukee County aren't like held together. So that is not remotely compact, which the writing said it should be. And then the other thing they did was they disrupted my community of interest. I'm part of the North Shore Fire Department, the North Shore Library System, the North Shore Education System, all that's in Milwaukee County, and the map didn't look right. But the real reason that I decided to participate is because, I have a good life. I don't need to do this. I have a good life. I am a member of the Women's Club of Wisconsin. absolutely bipartisan. We often do not talk politics whatsoever. I have Republican and Democratic friends, but I think when I looked at these maps, I realized that we are supposed to live in a democratic, under democratic federalism. We're a republic. We're a democratic republic. That means we are supposed to elect the people that represent us. And one of my earliest ancestors, I also do family research, one of my earliest ancestors was a Minuteman in the American Revolution. And he actually voted he helped choose the representatives that wrote New Jersey's first constitution. The whole purpose of America was to get under the tyranny of absolute power. And what we have created, the Democrats did it in Maryland, and the Republicans did it here. What we have created is a system that creates absolute power, and that leads to tyranny. So that's what I said, I'm gonna do my bit for patriotism, and that's why I was very excited to join the plaintiff class.
Wow, thank you. Yeah, I couldn't think of a better reason than to save us from the absolute tyranny that is resulting. So thank you for your work. I want to turn right now to Michael and ask, what brought a professor of environmental engineering to be a plaintiff in a gerrymandering case? What made you care so much about this?
Well, I live in one of the elongated districts. I live in Whitefish Bay, Bill just talked about. And my interest really started in 2010. And I realized that was before the new maps were made, okay? But the Act 10, getting rid of public unions, really upset me, especially since Walker never mentioned that the whole time he was a candidate. And that really started me thinking about these types of things. While the districts weren't gerrymandered, then they knew it was coming, so they had safe cover. And then, ensuing years, things, the Act 43, which actually set up these maps, the way it was done, it was so opaque, done undercover. The representatives had to sign a non-disclosure agreement. This is very unhealthy. We all know this. It leads to distrust. It leads to dysfunction and a paralysis where we are right now in the country as a whole. It's just very bad for democracy. I retired in 2012 at the end of the year, and I wanted to do some things I hadn't done before. So my wife and I got very involved in voter registration and as poll workers in the city of Milwaukee. And we actually trained the poll workers. We're one of the group of people trained poll workers. And we joined the League of Women Voters, part of our voter registration. And one day, must have been the summer of 2018, I got an email saying that the Whitford case was seeking to go back and to the Supreme Court, but they needed more plaintiffs. So I said, what the heck, I can do that. And had an interview, and they asked me to do it, and that's how I got involved.
Yeah, so it sounds like you got involved in a number of different things after retiring and saw that across all those issues that you were caring about,
Right.
unions, voting, all of those issues were being negatively impacted, and that representatives weren't really representing as a result.
Right. And I could add other things if you care.
Claire, can I ask a question here?
Sure, go for it.
I'd ask Michael and Debbie. I know, Michael, you live in Assembly District 23.
Right.
Deborah, you live in Assembly District 24. Do you feel like a Democrat has a fair chance of winning the elections in either of those Assembly districts?
Absolutely not. And yet I just sent money to the Democratic candidate today because I'm glad someone's running. I think it's very important that Representative Ott has an opponent. I write to him, my wife and I write to him all the time, and I'd say 90% of the time, I don't even get a response. Not even a thank you, not even gonna drop dead, nothing. It just, nothing happens. I think that's just terrible.
So I would say in District 24, I feel like your chances are even harder to, I'm not going to say a Democrat would never win, and I wouldn't even say that in District 23, which we affectionately call the leg lamp, because it has that little tiny, from the Christmas story, that little tiny leg filled with that big Ozaki County there sitting on top of the little leg down the lake. But that's our affectionate phrase for it. But my feeling is that a Democrat, I don't want to say a Democrat could never get elected, because I don't want the people that are running or the people that are voting to think it's a hopeless cause. But in District 24, it covers 4 counties. Snippet from Milwaukee County, it covers part of Ozaki County, then it goes over, picks up part of Washington County, then it goes down to Ozaki County.
Waukesha, you mean? So the odds are stacked against you.
The odds are definitely stacked against you, because just think about how to try to campaign, how to just do any of it. The odds are definitely stacked against you.
Mhm.
Wow, across 4 counties.
Yep.
That's incredible. We heard in the last time around that even when it was split between 2 counties in western Milwaukee and into the suburbs, that Helen, who we spoke to last time, felt like she had no idea who was representing her. And I can't imagine between 4 districts what it's like. Where do we go from here? We've seen a lot of, in the April 7th primary, a few more counties passed resolutions and referendums supporting fair maps, but we know that Wisconsin is, not a ballot initiative state, so we can't just vote on it. So where do we take this? What can people listening do to join the cause? Maybe I'll turn to Michael first, then Bill, and then Debbie.
Okay.
Well, I was very happy to see the results of the April 7 election for the state Supreme Court. I really think, I could be wrong, but I think before anything really happens, we have to turn the court around. Okay. And it's going to take some time. I think that's the first step, but there's other things we can do, and I see people doing with fair maps, etc. But I think that's a very important thing. People need to pay attention to these elections, and they need to get out and vote. And I'm encouraged.
What causes that encouragement? What are you seeing in your community?
I didn't think Jo was going to win, but she did, and she won big. And that's very encouraging to me. I also just see up until the pandemic, we were out all the time talking, trying to register people to vote. We were going to DMVs. My wife and I went to the DMV on Teutonia, and just talking to people, just see enthusiasm in the air, and you can feel it. People waiting in line many hours. It poured that night. People got soaked, but they waited. And this is good. Not that they got soaked and had to wait. That was a fiasco. But just the excitement in the air. I feel it. I hope I'm correct.
I feel it too. And Deborah, did you say, or I learned somewhere that you were trying to get a Ozaki County ballot passed at some point? Is that correct?
Sure. I worked with my friends to the immediate north. I live in Milwaukee County, but I worked with my friends in Ozaki County who were very interested to have the Ozaki County Board pass a resolution that would allow a referendum to go on the ballot. And there was a meeting of the Ozaki County Board, and where it really showed sort of a suburban rural divide, where the closer you got to Milwaukee County, the more the supervisors were in favor of this, and the farther out you got, the less they were in favor of it. And really, I think it showed, again, it showed the effects of the power of the gerrymander, because there are some of the powerhouses in the Republican Party live and work and play in Ozaki County. And they weren't even interested in having the people take a shot at it. They just said, no, we're just not interested. And there were a lot of people. They'd never had so many people at a county board meeting. People spoke very passionately, and it wasn't just Democrats that were talking. It was people that were independents and some that had voted Republicans or Republicans. And yet it got voted down quickly, just like that. And it was a disappointment, but it certainly showed the power of the gerrymander.
Yeah, thank you. And what is anything happening as a follow-up, or is that there's nothing that can be done if they reject it at the county board level?
I haven't followed if they're doing, I think they're not doing anything more at the county level, probably because what was not going to happen then is not going to happen now. But the issue certainly hasn't gone away, and the passion among the people of the county has not gone away either. And so it was just one, battle in the war for fair maps, if you want to put it that way. And indeed, it may serve the action that was taken may actually serve to motivate the people to feel more strongly about the issue than ever. So the end is not the end.
Definitely not. We're not stopping until one vote really means one vote. I hear you on that. And Milwaukee, I believe, has passed both a resolution and a referendum to support fair maps, correct?
Yeah, and that
but
doesn't.
Ozaki has not. Is that?
And Ozaki is not, and I believe you're right about Milwaukee County. To be honest, because of the way my map is drawn, both at the Assembly and the Senate and at the congressional level, I actually have to pay a lot more attention to politics to the north of me than to Milwaukee politics.
Wow. I want to come back to that because I think that's a huge point, that when you have an elongated district, you're a lot farther from where decisions are being made, and sometimes across county lines, and that's a huge issue we've heard before. Bill, what would you say to that question?
Well, there are lots of things to do. At this point, Debbie has talked about these referendums and Claire about these referendums and resolutions. And this is a map that shows that 51 of the 72 counties in the state have now adopted either a county board resolution or a referendum by direct vote of the citizens, proposed a new method of redistricting that takes the politicians out. We call it nonpartisan redistricting. Governor Evers has endorsed that. Where a referendum is held, it always passes with at least 2/3 of the vote. That's as close as it's ever been. In Rock County, for example, in April, it passed with 80% of the vote. This is the same kind of referendum that Ozaki County won't consider, Debbie. And what you're finding is that the citizens understand this is an issue, as Debbie put it very eloquently. This is an issue of fair play. This is an issue of a very basic democracy, the rules of the game. Now, the Republican legislators understand that they have unaccountable power because of the gerrymander, and they just as soon keep it. So I don't expect the legislators to change their mind, Republican legislators, without pressure. Who can bring the biggest pressure on them? Your Republican friends in districts represented by Republicans. So high on my list is to find Republican friends in districts represented by Republicans and try to persuade them to talk to their legislator about this and put some pressure. I'd also say that if you wanted to get involved in this, there is an organization called Fair Maps Wisconsin. Just Google it, it'll turn up. Look particularly at for the Fair Maps Wisconsin newsletter, which has some very specific suggestions of things you can participate in.
Thanks, Bill. It was helpful to see that map. There's so much purple in there, and it's a little bit of white speckled in, but it feels like a purple sweep.
Well, you can see why the Ozaki County Republican supervisors don't want a referendum. They know who will win the referendum. I mean, who's won it every time it's been held? By at least 2/3 of the vote. Even in Ozaki County, that's what'll happen.
Yeah, Debbie definitely had the odds stacked against her on getting that done. Debbie, I'd ask the same question to you.
So I would reiterate primarily what Bill says, that talking to people that either don't understand, to educate them, or people that that have influence builders in the Republican Party, or people that can reach their legislatures. I think holding people's feet to the fire is good. Is say to them, you know, where do you stand? Will you take a stand and say that you're willing to have a nonpartisan group draw these maps? In other words, out the people that are unwilling, so you know. And then, if you know, when you think about the Supreme Court, my view as a former lawyer is that I think through the centuries, the Supreme Court has a tendency to sort of go as the public sentiment goes. It sometimes goes ahead of the public sentiment, sometimes it lags behind. But at the end of the day, and I said this while we were waiting for the decision to come down in Whitford, at the end of the day, it's public sentiment that matters. It's the power of the people that matter. So if there is enough, I do believe we're seeing a sea change generally in America, recognizing some things that, some history we'd forgotten or never learned. And this can be part of that. And it can be really saying to your friends and neighbors, here's why it's wrong. This is why it doesn't have anything to do with your personal political party. Even some of the Republicans in a Republican area have no power, because only the people that lead the party have power, right? So it's just wrong. And I think if we convince enough people, they'll see the light. Public opinion will be swayed. We have to hope for that.
All right, so I'm hearing calls to any activists who may be watching this in a future time to bird dog their leaders and get a yes or no position on where they stand on this, and to talk to your neighbors, talk to Republicans you may know, talk to Democrats too, and talk to them, bring in your personal stories about why it matters to you, why it's a question of process and procedure and baseline justice and functioning for the democracy, not a question of a political party affiliation. Did I miss anything?
Can I add one warning that
Yes.
that at the end of the day, what I worry about is not who's going to win or lose, but if we don't fix this problem and everyone sees it and everyone knows their vote doesn't matter, not only will they not vote, but eventually they won't follow the law because they're not being represented. So that's what happens. And I don't want to see people feel so disillusioned in the process that they feel like, I'm just not going to obey those rules because I had nothing to do with them. And that, I think, is something we should all be concerned about.
I totally agree. It's a question of legitimacy. And if you believe the contract has already been broken and you're not part of it, then you have no deference to uphold that.
Right.
I think that's an excellent point. Michael, were you about to say something? Or just
No, I think that's an excellent point, and it's serious.
Yeah, I'd even say as a young person, I see a lot of that in my generation. I think you see nowadays with so many young people-led protests, it's not a question of apathy or not caring. We care deeply, but there's been a long sense of participation in the political process, not being fair, not going to result in anything. So, you know, why participate? So I think you've really hit something directly on the head, Debbie, with that sentiment.
Thanks.
Any other comments or thoughts or hopes or fears? We welcome anything to the table before closing.
Well, when I talk to people about the present situation, they say, look, gerrymandering's always been going on. Okay, it's nothing new. We've had this, 150 years, great, even more than that. And I say, I know, I'm from Maryland. I grew up in Maryland. I get that, okay? I think the difference is that it just so happened in 2010, the tools that were available were much more precise and they're getting more precise with big data. So therefore, it was like gerrymandering on steroids. And maybe the Democrats would have done the same thing. I would hope not, but probably would. And so that's where we are right now. It's not. It really is about the future of democracy. I don't think that's an overstatement.
Another thing that I think the people watching this should know is that I've heard Republicans say that the Supreme Court said gerrymandering is fine. The Supreme Court did not say gerrymandering was fine. They said that it was not part of the democratic process. It was not democratic. But then they said their hands were tied. To me, that says, for right or for wrong, whether you agree with their decision, they've left it to us. So that means that someday maybe we'll have to march in the street for this issue as well. Hopefully not, but that's what I see is that the courts have not said it's okay. So don't let anybody tell you that.
Yeah, that's helpful clarification because, I'm not a lawyer and some of that goes straight over my head and gets really complicated. So it's good to be clear that they basically said this was just not an issue that the courts could decide. Is that correct? That it, as you say, was up to us is a political decision not to be made at the court.
Yeah. Right. The word they used was non-justiciable, which is a hard word to say. It just means that their hands were tied.
Phil, any final thoughts?
Well, I agree with all the sentiments that were said, and I think gerrymandering goes to the very heart of democracy. Just to reinforce what Michael said, the academics say that almost all of the worst gerrymanders in the history of the country, state legislative gerrymanders in the history of the country, have occurred in the last 10 years. And it's a product of this, partly the greater tools that we have, as you referred, and I think to some extent, people are just a little brasher. They're less embarrassed about an extreme gerrymander.
Yeah.
Well, I'm convinced of the seriousness of the matter, and I pledge to keep going out and talking to my neighbors and holding these conversations, and I hope everyone watching will too. Thank you so much for all of your work and your time today to talk with us. Very sincerely